This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Late Late Show on Thursday, the 8th of February 2024. I'm your host, Paul Hazzard. On tonight's show, I'll be talking to head teacher and author of The A to Z of Secondary Leadership, Andy Hunter. Let's get to it.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to tonight's show. We have a great show lined up for you. Tonight, we're going to talk about a brand new book, The A to Z of Secondary Leadership, an absolutely essential read for anyone who's already in leadership or ever hopes to be in leadership. And we're privileged tonight because we've got the author, Andy Hunter. Andy, I see you're in the studio. How are you?
Hi, Paul. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
That's great. Oh yeah, doing great here. Apart from the weather, we had those snow showers going over and it's really cold, but apart from that, we're doing well. Andy, you're a really busy guy. You are a head teacher.
Yeah.
You have a super range of interests. You like canoeing, hill walking, jazz, and you've got time to write a book. Do you have a magic wand up your sleeve or something?
Well, Paul. I mean, I'm very lucky in that I can write. I can write very quickly. So actually, the trickiest bit about writing the book was working out how to make my ideas fit into the A to Z format.
Yeah.
And which thing was going to go with which letter. But it was something that I made time to do because it was important to me at the time to write the book. Things were, for one reason or another, things have been a little bit tricky at work, and it was really good for me to spend some time really thinking through and reconnecting with the reasons that I do what I do, and reminding myself, why I enjoy it so much. I think.
Andy, that sounds really great, and that really comes across in the book, and we'll get into the nitty gritty of it. But that writing style that you have, it's almost conversational. As I read the chapters, I could almost hear you saying them to me. So it's very accessible and a very appealing style. And you find that easy enough, you say?
Yeah. I enjoy writing. I enjoy writing, parents' newsletters. I enjoy writing, notes to staff and bulletins and things.
Now you do know you're making an awful lot of people jealous now.
And I guess as well, Paul, that a lot of what's in the book comes from conversations that I've had with people. So it is genuinely conversational in the truest sense, because all those ideas are ideas that I've talked through in the first instance.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, it's very, very clear, very accessible. In getting to what you're saying, but it's also a very clear and accessible book in the way it's set out. The alphabetical order leaves it very easy to kind of dive in. It's not a book you have to kind of start at the beginning and go right through. I think that's a big advantage to people who want to maybe focus on an aspect, of leadership.
Well, and I think you're right. It's a book that you certainly don't have to start at the beginning and finish at the end. But it was a real challenge writing it because, So I started off with, the first thing I did was just to write an A to Z and put in chapter titles where I thought they might go.
Yeah.
And what I found as I was going on was that I was changing the names of chapters because I suddenly had a gap somewhere I couldn't fill. So something
Right.
that started off being called well-being was renamed because I needed to make a space somewhere else in order
Yes.
to fit in, a different W. I forget what W was now. Wondering.
Yeah.
So there was a
Yeah.
lot of kind of shuffling around, and the day that I was driving to work and I came up with the idea for the chapter called Zebras. And I really felt like I'd kind of unpicked the unpicked the lock at that point because I had a Z, and that's not easy to come by.
It's not. No. No, it's not indeed. Yeah. Um, yeah. Another thing, Andy, that I realized is, I was very able to empathize with you as I'm reading. And I also read in your introduction a quirky thing you and I have in common is that we actually like taking assemblies.
Mm.
I loved taking assemblies. I thought they were great. I would, yeah, just love getting up there. What did you like about them, or what do you like about them?
Um, I like the challenge of delivering an assembly which is going to provoke some thought and to stand out
Mhm.
maybe from other assemblies that people hear, and is going to land in such a way as it might resonate. Maybe not the day you deliver it, but maybe in the weeks to come and the days after that. I find it really interesting. It's a very pure form of communication, isn't it?
Yeah,
To
yeah,
slim down what you're saying to just those few minutes.
yes, yeah, yeah. It's very powerful. One of the things I used to always like was you get up and you take your assembly and you kind of think, okay, I did that. I put a lot of effort into that. It's done. There's 200 children. They go off about their business. And, maybe a week or a fortnight later, a sixth former says to you, here, sir, what was all that assembly about? You were talking about that caged bird thing. What was that all about? And you kind of think, yeah, that was a meeting of minds. I got through to people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I absolutely agree. I did one recently when I was talking about an incident from my childhood, from when I was kind of 6 or 7, when I made a mistake and I felt pretty bad about it. Um,
Mm.
and I made the point that I'm now 50, and I can remember. I remember that day in extreme detail. We
Yeah.
were in a park, and I remember the wasps buzzing in and out the bin. I remember the colour of the green paint that was peeling on the bench where we were stood.
Yeah.
And it was a very innocuous thing. I went off to buy an ice cream, and I was supposed to get one for my brother, and I didn't. And I got told off for it. And no one else in my family remembers that event. No one else at all. But I
Yeah.
remember it absolutely acutely. And now 1,000 kids in Suffolk know about it as well. And a kid
Yeah.
came up to me a few days after I'd done the assembly, and he said, "Yeah, I enjoyed your assembly." He said, "It just landed a bit different." And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Something that would just, I think you have to give a little bit of yourself, don't you? Give a little bit of yourself, and that hooks in your listener. Uh,
Oh, I think it really does, yeah. And I think your book really does that. One of the things I like about it in particular is that your book gives those real life examples. You've got role plays and situations, and it just makes it a real, authentic read rather than something that's dry. Yeah, I found that very appealing.
Well, and some of those things, happened while I was writing the book. So as I was dealing with something, I was also thinking, "Oh, fantastic! I get at least half a chapter out of this."
Yeah.
So I'd go home at the end of the day and quickly make a few notes about, what do I think about what's just happened? What's that? What's that made me consider differently?
Yeah.
Which is it's a great way to live your working life, because it brings a sense of enjoyment into what might otherwise just be difficulty.
Gosh, it really does. Yeah. So, Andy, I'd like to pick out, two or three chapters and maybe just go into them in a little bit more
Sure,
detail.
sure.
So, as I read your book, one of the chapters that appealed to me a lot was you have a chapter on listening, And I always valued and prized listening. When I was in school and leading groups and teams and whole school, why do you think listening is important in leadership?
Well, well, yeah, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? That's cutting straight to the heart of things. I don't know about you, Paul. I've sat in so many conversations where people know what they think, and when it's their turn to speak, they say what they think, and when it's their turn to speak again, they say what they think again. And
Yeah.
there's no sense of kind of interplay or development. There's none of that kind of dialectic of, well, so I think A and you think B, so between us maybe we think C. There's none of that development, and so too often people aren't listening at all. And one of the points I'll make is are you, when you're not talking, are you actually listening, or are you thinking about what it is you're going to say next? Because if you are, then whatever you're going to say next probably doesn't really address what's being said to you.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, definitely. Um, I was always, I had a mentor who told me that, you really have to listen to everybody because one on one can be five.
Yeah.
And it's that point that you make. If you're not listening and you're trying to formulate your next answer or contribution or whatever it is, it doesn't move on. And there's very little creativity. And if everybody in the group or the leadership team is doing that, it can become very monotonous, very banal.
Yeah, and you miss some really golden insights, don't you, as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, one thing that I'm quite passionate about is the idea that just because the majority of people in teaching aren't senior leaders doesn't mean that they couldn't be senior leaders. It means that they've chosen not to be. So it doesn't make them any less insightful or intelligent or well informed than the people who have chosen to be senior leaders. And I think senior leaders who approach their communications with a sense of hierarchy are in terrible danger of missing out on a lot of wisdom that's in those classrooms and corridors. And if you can just tap into that, then the kind of the 360 insights into your school it gives you are really valuable, super valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really a way of learning. When you listen to people, you're kind of
Yeah,
closed off, and it's very difficult for you as an individual and to learn, and then it's very hard to stand up, I always think, as a leader.
yeah, and I'm wrong a lot of the time. So it's a good job there's other people around who think different things.
Very true. I'm very often wrong.
And it doesn't worry me being wrong. I think that's fine. I'm happy to start saying, okay, here's my opening gambit. It's probably wrong.
Yeah.
Let's go from there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why have a whole team?
Yeah. And I think we'll look at that in when we look at another chapter. One of the things I notice when you write about listening, you've chosen what I would call the TA, or the transactional analysis model, to
Yeah.
kind of underpin your approach to listening. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are hundreds of models about human interactions, but what I love about transaction analysis, excuse me, is that it has this idea that we inhabit a mind state of either a parent or an adult and a child, and that maps so neatly onto a school context that I just think it's worth really looking into. And the basic idea, Paul, is that we, in any conversation, any interaction with anybody else, we either are in the persona of a child, where we don't want to accept any responsibility and we think things are generally unfair and it's not our fault, or we're an adult where we're looking to blame somebody else for whatever has happened and be disapproving and find fault with people, or we're an adult and we're looking to find solutions, and we're coming to the question, from a position of curiosity rather than a position of judgment.
Mhm.
And I think it's just absolutely transformational because we all do it. We all do it all the time, and doubly so when we're tired. We might start off a conversation as an adult and just find ourselves drifting into a parent mode, and we can do it with kids or with other staff. And as soon as we end up snapping or saying, "Well, you would think that, wouldn't you?" We've lost our emotional equilibrium, and we're
Mhm.
no longer the solution focused adult. We're into casting blame and getting into an emotional ding dong that's not going to do anybody any favors.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest application of it for school leaders are those emails that come in from parents, which are really accusatory and
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
angry and aggressive. Uh, and aggression immediately prompts us to feel defensive, and we want to kind of engage with it and say, "No, that's not true. That's absolutely unfair. That's not what happened. That's not what we said. Your child." And in doing that, Paul, we just completely miss the point. Because any parent that writes to any school in anger is doing it. I'm absolutely convinced is doing it because they love their child and they're worried and they don't know what to do next.
Mhm.
Um, and if we respond to that instead of you people, you make all these promises you don't keep, and that school's useless. I can't believe it. If we respond to all those criticisms, we just miss the tender core of that parent who loves their child and wants us to do better for their child. And if we can engage with that person,
Mhm.
then not only can we solve their problems, but we also, we make a friend, we make an advocate
Mhm.
out of someone who's at the minute predisposed to be an enemy. So there's a real opportunity there.
I think you're absolutely right. Yes, yeah, it does take a lot of the steam or the aggression or the sting out of things. Yeah, and kind of gets parents around to seeing that you are as committed to their child as they are, and that you're trying to help. And maybe in the short term, they don't always agree with your methods, but they can come around to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something else we don't always appreciate is that not all of our parents had a really enjoyable time at secondary school.
Mm.
I think lots of people have fond memories of their primary school. Not everyone has fond memories of their secondary school.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people to email a head teacher with a complaint is quite an intimidating thing to do.
It
So
is.
we shouldn't be surprised if people have to get up a real head of kind of indignation in order to give them the confidence to do what they're doing, because they've probably been writing that email in their head for 3 or 4 days before they eventually write it out on the computer.
Good point, yeah. Very good, yeah. I always found, Andy, it was using the transactional analysis or the parent adult child model was very useful in classrooms as well.
Mm,
And you could um, there is a way through transactional analysis to bring a kind of framework of discipline to classes and groups. If as a teacher you step out of teacher and out of parent mode, and particularly if you're in angry parent mode, and you begin to relate to your class as an adult and expect them to relate back to you as an adult, I think there's a whole dynamic shift happens in the room. Would you have
yeah,
experienced that too?
yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. It's excuse me. And the thing with that parent mode is that it rewards and punishes
Mm,
in an emotional way, doesn't it? So when
mm,
you're being that parent teacher, if a kid does something well, you say, "Oh, well done, you're very good. I'm very proud of you. Lovely stuff." Uh,
mhm,
and you're probably not even responding to the work in any kind of meaningful way. You're just saying,
mhm,
basically, "I like you as a person." And
mhm.
when they get something wrong, that same character is responding by saying, "Well, I don't like you as a person. You're a bad child. You've done a bad thing. Your behaviour is bad."
Yes.
And that's all. There's no good from either side of that equation. Uh,
No.
Whereas to just be able to say, "Well, okay, here's where we are. Here's what we've got. What should we do with it next?" Uh,
Mm.
puts a lot of responsibility on the child. But I think it's responsibility that they respond to very, very well, as you say.
Yeah, I think so. I always find that. Yeah, when you treat them as an adult, it's kind of like in my sense, it's a space they walk into, and you have different conversations with them, and you can talk to them about controversial, contentious, difficult issues, things they did in a much less accusatory way, much as you're saying. You're not the angry parent. Um, there aren't the negative strokes, if you like, and yeah, they're much more forthcoming.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think a key thing though is to avoid saying I am treating you like an adult, or if you want me to treat you like an adult, because that in
Mm,
itself has a kind of parentish
it
sense to it,
does.
doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
When you grow up, I'll treat you as grown up. It's kind of disapproving in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. hmm So, listening and listening to everyone is crucial for everybody in a school, but particularly so for the leader, because I always thought, again, it was a mentor who told me this. Paul, you listen to everybody, but in the end, you have to be your own man, and you have to make your own decisions, and you have to stick with them. So, we do have to make leadership's about judgment, it's about drawing conclusions, it's about implementing a vision, and so on, that not everybody will agree with or like. Um, and sometimes when I listen to people and I made the decision based on a lot of evidence, they would come up to me afterwards and say, "But Paul, I talked to you about that for hours. Why did you not do what I told you?" How do you deal with people like that then, who, you've listened to them, you've heard in depth what they have to say, but the decision kind of went against them, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Um, I mean, it kind of puts me in mind of that Muhammad Ali quote about how the fight is won long before you step into the ring. The fight's won in the training room and on the heavy bag and with the skipping rope. And I think those big decisions that we take they stand and fall on the work that we do before we take the decision.
Mm.
Um, which is kind of what you're saying, isn't it? Those people. Of course, we need to listen to everyone, and it's not for me, that's not a publicity exercise.
Mhm.
I generally want to gather that information and use it to kind of find a way through. And I suppose then in communicating the decision, it's probably helpful, just exactly as we do with kids, to lay out our thought process
Mm.
and say, well, here's where I started. Here's the problem. Here are the potential solutions. And here's my thought process as I decided which one of those solutions to eventually go to for the best. And here's
Mm.
why I chose it. And thanks to everyone who helped me on the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean,
Mm.
you can't please everyone all the time, can you?
Well, I think that's the point, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And then I always thought, and I wonder what your thoughts on this, that always kind of pushed me back into, you know, the limits of my courage, if you like. Where is my courage to stand up and maybe, because sometimes, you went against the majority on a decision,
Mm.
and yet your decision, might have been right. And, those are tough places to be for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, I
Does that
mean,
listening and that decision making process, is it underpinned by a courage?
yeah, so I think it is really underpinned by courage, but it's also underpinned in those kind of mindsets that we talked about. So it makes me think of a time when we had to change teachers' contact hours because of a budgetary problem, and people had frankly not enough non-contact time, but it was more than we could afford them to have. So we
Mm,
had to kind of change that, and
mm,
people didn't like it.
mhm,
and I found out that at one point that the union who had not kind of engaged in a consultation exercise waited until 2 or 3 minutes before the consultation exercise closed and then objected kind of just before the lid shut. And I was really upset by it because I was sort of thinking, well, look, we know each other, we work with each other all the time. Why are you treating me like this? And I took it very, very personally. I suppose I was kind of thinking, if you really loved and respected me, you wouldn't have done what you've just done. And it took me a couple of days of sore temper to realise that I was just behaving like a child. People were protecting their own interests, as they have an absolute right to do. And for me to take that personally was a real misstep. And if I hadn't have realised that and kind of caught myself, I could have made a real mess of that, because I would have been offended and belligerent, and that wouldn't have helped at all.
Well, yeah. Gosh, that raises a few questions for me. I suppose the first one is, because in the end of the day, Andy, and your book really emphasizes this, in the end of the day, we are all humans, and successful leadership, really depends on us being human. But what do we do with hurt? What happens when we get hurt as leaders?
Well, I think I don't know about you, but I forget all the time that I'm a leader. And I need to be reminded by colleagues that, maybe not everyone tells me what they really think because I'm the boss. And maybe people aren't quite honest with me because I'm the boss. So I can pat myself on the back about my my warm, informal relationships with all my colleagues, but the fact of the matter is that I'm the boss, and that's going to be a filter on those communications, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
And we just have to remember that we are, So while I'm at work, I am Andy, and I hope people relate to me as Andy, but I'm also the boss, and I'm also the implementer of policies, and the person that has to find the money to make the budget balance, and the person that has to remind people they haven't been on duty when they should be on duty, and the person that has to maintain standards. And those things may not always make people delighted to talk to me, but it's such a cliche, isn't it? It's about the kids. It's about making sure that what we do is the best thing we can possibly do for the kids.
Yeah, I think we do need to remember that. Yes, yeah. I suppose I also think, and just listening to you, reminding me, we need our time away from school as well, because we need to get rid of the hurt. And I know, I think you do sailing and hill walking. You're interested in jazz, and I know I do a lot of those things as well. And I always thought when I come home, my family would ground me very much, very quickly. And they can do it kind of both ways. If you've had a hard day and you're feeling the kind of the weight and the wounds of leadership, they're quite good at picking me up and dusting me down and getting me back again. If you come home and you think, I've got this job, I nailed it today, I tell you, I know what leadership is, I tell you, they're not long knocking the wind out of your sails. Who do you think you are, Daddy?
Well, yeah, and I don't know about you, the first 2 or 3 days of the summer holiday, especially if you've had a busy end to term and you've been used to kind of, walking around like a kind of leadership wizard, just casting decisions around you as you go. Let's do this, let's do that, let's change this, let's change that. Has everyone done these things?
Yeah.
And then you get home, and if you accidentally carry on being your leadership self at home for 30 seconds, they'll soon remind you that that's not your role in the family.
You will be in some trouble. You will indeed, yeah. Um, Andy, it's a fascinating chapter on listening, and of course, so much more to it in the reading of the chapter, and it's just a wealth of stories and anecdotes, wisdom and advice, just like you've been telling us now. But maybe we could move on to another chapter, and this was a chapter that caught my eye because of the title, and it's a chapter called "Questing." And, I thought a little bit beforehand, questing? What is he on about? And it's questing, not questioning, in case anybody hasn't heard me properly there. But it's a fascinating chapter. And you kind of built that on the framework of props 1928 theory. In case anybody doesn't know, it's about narrative theory, and it's about storyline and plotting and how stories and so on are put together. And when I read it, I thought, wow, what a lovely framework to kind of hang that chapter on. So how did you come up with that?
Well, so interestingly, it was originally questioning, and then I came up with questioning, and questioning had to become wondering, which meant that well-being had to become something. There was a big shuffle of the chapters to try
It's
and
like a
make
game of
that,
chess.
to try and make that work. And it was so it was about two things that were on my mind, and originally there were going to be kind of two chapters, and one was about the idea that once you've started something, you've got to see it through. And I'd been working with a few young leaders at the time who were doing a fantastic job of planning their change, and they understood lots of models of change, and they did a lot of research, and they could put together a fantastic presentation for governors on change, and essentially, Paul, do all the bits that don't require you to actually go out into the school and make anyone do anything different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at the point when they did have to go out into the school, make someone do something different, nothing happened. It was like, well, I've told people. I told people what to do. I showed them what to do. I asked them to read this paper.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that it? And of course, that's not it at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe the first 10% you've done,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest of the work is the actually making it happen. So that was one idea I had in my head,
Mm-hmm.
and there was another separate kind of chapter about basically minding your business.
Mm-hmm.
And just sticking to your job and not sticking your in with other people's job. And then
Yes, I remember reading that. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
and that sort of became as I was writing that, I reflected on, well, why would you do that? And that was why the idea of the kind of the side quest from the computer game came to me,
Mm-hmm.
because those are just those. I don't know if you play computer games, Paul. The side quest is like a little low
Mm-hmm.
stakes, high fun thing that
Yeah,
isn't part of the main game. It
yeah,
and I guess it's there just like a kind of a comedic interlude in Shakespeare to hold people's interest.
yeah.
And it made me think, well, if people are side questing in their roles, is it
Mm-hmm.
because their interest isn't being held by the rest of what they've got? And therefore, is there a leadership task for us to help people to fulfill their roles by building in a kind of a mixture of long-term high stakes and short-term low stakes tasks,
Mm-hmm.
so that we have that kind of variety. And as I was thinking those things through, I started writing them as two separate chapters, and then they just seemed to really neatly meet in the middle. And when I cut and paste both the documents together, it only took like a sentence or two to
Mm-hmm.
to make the segue. I was quite amazed at how really I'd written one chapter and had no idea I was doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I have to say that was very interesting when I read it. It's probably something I encouraged, maybe year heads or heads of department to do, to have kind of tasks or projects or whatever in different time frames. But
Mm.
I really only thought about it when I actually read your chapter. But I think it's very good. It's also very good for the development of the individual as a leader, to have different time frames on different projects, but I think as well, as you say, within their own remit. I think that's important, particularly in the early days of leadership, not to be kind of spreading yourself too wide.
Yeah, absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
And not to come to it with a belief that you have as good an understanding of everyone's remit as they have,
Yeah.
and just go unhelpfully sticking your oar in
Yeah. Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. Well, everybody can be the armchair football manager, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and it's really easy, isn't it, to see? It's really, I think. Excuse me. Oh, it's shocking, lingering cough. I think people in the early stages of leadership focus on spotting flaws in things,
Hmm.
and think that if they're able to dissect everything that's wrong with a plan, then they've done a pretty good job. Uh, but obviously that's missing a real a real core part, isn't it, of finding solutions, which is it's not good enough to just say what doesn't work. You've got to bring something more to it than that. You've got to say, well, why don't we try something else? Why don't we have another go in a different way?
Yeah. Um, I'll have to be careful here, but I remember one time I used to work with somebody who maybe ought never to have been a leader, but, but got a position as a leader. And I remember, again, there was another mentor who said to me, but Paul, just wait, just watch. They'll get the rough edges knocked off them. And, I always thought there is something for a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, there is that kind of novelty of getting promoted into a position and really getting carried away on that wave or sense of importance, or, I got this job as a leader, therefore people see me as a leader, therefore I can do this, that, and the other. And I think, yeah, it can happen to anybody, I suppose, but humility, helps us come to terms with that kind of, what did Shakespeare, that o'er-vaulting ambition, maybe, and that almost arrogance that people have.
Yeah, and I mean, and you see that a lot, don't you?
You
Uh,
do. You
and
do.
I think sometimes that what looks like arrogance, Paul, might just be that people lack a bit of confidence that
Yeah.
what they were doing as an assistant head is going to be okay as a deputy. What they were doing as a deputy is going to be okay as a head, and they kind of feel as if they need to grow into some, put on a new set of clothes with this new role, and somehow act in a way that befits the role. And I think that's just an
Yes,
immediate disaster.
you've said it much better. That's kind of what I meant. Yes, yeah, yeah, great. Mhm.
When I got my first when I took up my first headship, a friend who was the head uh, was talking to me about it, and he said, "Look, the only rule for the first 6 months is don't be a twit." It wasn't a word he chose, but it was excellent advice.
Yeah,
Excellent advice. Whatever you do, just don't reel yourself in, because if you arrive and you kind of land as if you've parachuted in and say, right, everything's okay now, I'm here, it can only go one way, can't it? It can only go
yes,
one way.
yeah, yeah. One of the early promotions I got, and I would have been fairly young at the time, but the advice again from another mentor, the advice was, do not speak in any meeting for the first 2 years. Just listen, just watch. There's something to it. I do think. I do think there's something to it. Yeah. Mhm.
Those people that you gather throughout your career are just priceless, aren't they?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
And after a time, you don't even need them there. You can just think to yourself, well, what would Nick do?
Yes.
What would Kate do here? What would Phil do? What would Samson do? And for me, those people, I've got maybe a dozen people
Yeah.
that I know well enough that I can kind of, I don't even have to ring them up. I can just guess what they would say to me if I asked them a question, and therefore bring another facet to my, to my thought process when I'm just really mulling something over.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you see that kind of conversational tone in your book goes a long way to achieving that. Well worth a read. Um, your that chapter on questing that we're talking about,
Yeah,
there is, and I suppose we're on it. There is a huge emphasis on people, the need for allies.
yeah,
Um, you have a lovely line, I've written it down here. A newborn initiative has to be nurtured into becoming. I love that phrase. I thought that was fantastic. But you go on to say then, a lot of it is you can have the idea and the concept and the vision yourself, but very, very quickly you need people and you need allies. Can you tell us why that's the case?
yeah. Because people won't. People will do things to an extent because you ask them to. You can get so far on, okay, I trust you, you haven't got it wrong before, it's a reasonable request, I'll do it.
Hmm.
But they're not going to do it with passion and determination under those circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
If you want people to do something with passion and determination, you've got to somehow get them to feel or to own a part of your own passion and determination.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you need, and that's why those people need to be, just allies, not followers. They've
Mm-hmm.
got to kind of understand and almost, they've got to take their part in carrying the torch for the initiative because they really believe in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like that thing about discretionary effort, isn't it? And statutory effort, or whatever the other effort is.
Mm-hmm.
If people do it because they have to, they'll do it okay. But if they do it because they really really want to, then you're on a winner. You're halfway home, aren't you?
It does. It does make a big difference. Yeah. Yeah, it certainly does. Yeah. And then there is, you go on to write, and I think this is part of narrative theory, and we can see it in films, or Star Wars, or you can see it in your novels and so on. You talk about the setback, that you're always going to get some kind of obstacle or barrier.
Yeah, and I guess the reason that Prop developed his theory by reading loads and loads of folk tales. Uh, and those folk tales come from human experience, don't they? The folk tale is a way of passing down generational knowledge from one generation to another.
Yeah.
And people that have used props theories to write novels and films that we all really identify with. So this is something that's born out of human experience. The idea that just when you think everything's going well, suddenly something happens and you have to make a decision about whether you're going to quit or whether you're going to persevere and find your way through and
Mm-hmm.
be
Mm-hmm.
triumphant. and and that's the when it's going well, that's the easy bit of leadership, isn't it? When everything's
Yeah.
going fine and everyone thinks you're a great guy because you've said yes to a few people and you've
Yeah.
been able to spread some good news and everything's going your way. It's the easiest job in the world.
Yeah.
But more often than not, it's not like that. So I think it's helpful to realise that that's okay. It's not our fault that things aren't plain sailing.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to dig deep, like countless of other people have been encouraged to do by this passing on of generational knowledge. Dig
Yeah.
deep and hope for the best, and you'll probably do all right.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you say, perseverance pays off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So, Andy, we're going to have a short break and we'll come back after these messages.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
A £1,000 cash incentive and a campaign to raise the profile of childcare workers in England has been launched as part of a recruitment drive. According to the BBC, thousands of extra nursery workers and childminders are needed as the government plan to expand funded hours begins. The Department for Education says that more than 100,000 working parents of 2-year-olds have already registered for the April rollout. However, early years charities say the campaign to recruit is too late. By September 2025, all eligible preschool children of working parents from the age of 9 months will be able to access 30 hours of term-time childcare. Research suggests that the number of childcare providers is currently falling as childminders leave the role, although the number of places remains roughly stable. Data suggests that almost 28,000 early years specialists will be needed to meet the rise in demand, an expansion of 8%. The BBC also reports that staff at Scotland's exam body will take strike action at the end of February over a pay dispute. Around 400 workers will stage 2 24-hour stoppages, and the action will also include an overtime ban, a ban on weekend working, and a ban on accruing time off in lieu. The union said the industrial action would have a major impact on the SQA's ability to prepare for exam season, but the SQA itself said it had contingency plans in place and that the strike would not have any impact at all. The Herald in Scotland also reports on calls from some quarters to raise the school starting age. A motion filed by the Glasgow Kelvin MSP calls for a national conversation on early years education and argues that a new approach could help tackle Scotland's long-standing educational attainment gap. The proposal to raise the starting age secured cross-party support in less than 24 hours. It's not the first time that the SNP have called for an increase in the starting age for pupils, but with recent concerns that the school system in Scotland is not helping to close the gap between disadvantaged pupils and their non-disadvantaged peers, the plans have appeared again. Under the plans, children would start school at 6 rather than 4 or 5, and a kindergarten stage for 3 to 6-year-olds would be introduced, increasing the amount of early years education by 12 months, replacing primary 1. The kindergarten stage would focus on learning through play. Full details of the proposal can be read online in a variety of media outlets. Finally, Schools Week covers demands from the University of Cambridge to delay the new teacher training framework. The university has said it lacks confidence in the new framework and suggests a delay of at least a year. The initial Teacher Training and Early Career Framework, or ITT-ECF, was unveiled by the Department for Education at the start of February. The ITT-ECF will combine and replace the currently separate ITT Core Content and the ECF from September 2025. The university called for the change to be implemented no sooner than September 2026, if at all. This would allow for further consultation, it says, and revision, as the new framework was just a tweak on the current one and was a wasted opportunity. The education faculty at Cambridge also claims that the framework sets unclear and contradictory objectives for ITT providers. In the longer term, the university says a framework should be developed and led by a non-party political, cross-sector expert team. The new framework has already divided opinions in the schools community, and many have taken to social media to express concerns. The Department for Education have declined to comment. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Welcome back to the Lit Lit Show on Thursday, the 8th of February, 2024. Tonight's guest is Andy Hunter, head teacher and author of The A to Z of Secondary Leadership. And we're talking about his book. We've had a great chat so far and focused on two key chapters, one on listening and one on questing. Andy, I wonder, could we come to what's possibly my favourite chapter? And that's the letter V. And you've gone for vulnerability. How did that title come about?
Yes, that's a good question. So, when you were saying earlier about the kind of humanity, I guess, I didn't used to read many educational books, and maybe 6 years ago, I bought High Challenge, Low Threat by Mary Myatt, where she talks about being human first, professional second, and I really liked that book, really, really liked it, and that started off a lot of thinking for me. And I think that idea around vulnerability and authenticity in leaders is a really interesting one. Because those people we were talking about before the break who put on their new set of leadership clothes to parade around the school as a leader are doing that, I guess, from a sense of insecurity. So they're putting on some professional armor to protect themselves from challenge or from question or from maybe being undermined. And once you've got a bit more confidence as a leader, I think you come to realise that being challenged and questioned and undermined are all really valuable, helpful things. Really, they're a really rich part of how you grow and how your understanding changes and how your decision making becomes more nuanced and more informed. But it takes some guts, doesn't it, to be publicly vulnerable, and it takes some judgment to get the level and the nature of that vulnerability right. Or I think it can really backfire.
It certainly does, yeah. You're very much in the spotlight, yeah. I always think, and this is a good thing in a very good way, and it comes from, that sense, as you say, of being challenged, but being challenged with respect and so on. That there's very much a personal development dimension to leadership, and if you embrace that, you do your job very well, but you also become a much better person. I
Mm.
think those two things always went, hand in glove for me. Would that be something you would see in leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. And people look to leaders to model all kinds of things, don't they? So you're not just modeling the policies and the practices you want people to undertake. You're also, whether you know it or not, you're modeling a way of speaking to people, a way of relating to people and interacting with people. And if you could model a confident yet authentic and vulnerable persona that says, look, it's okay, it's all right to make mistakes, it's okay to be wrong. Uh, doesn't mean we're incompetent, doesn't mean we're stupid, it just means we're human. And it's much better to admit those things.
Yeah.
Then you're kind of doing something to shape the organisation in that mould as well, which is extremely helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. People always look to the leader. And I remember reading, it must have been reading about an experiment or something, but it answered the question, why do the outcomes of meetings change, or why do meetings change when the leader is in the room, even if he or she doesn't contribute? And
Yeah.
they had done something, and they got all this equipment, but they had connected up in some way where people looked during the meeting. And even though they may have spoken across the table, their glances were all towards the leader. Now, it may have been seeking approval, or it may have been, wanting to impress the leader, or whatever. But I think the conclusion was, that people want their leaders to be themselves. They want them to be authentic, and that gives them that credibility, that clout, that power. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And that I think you're absolutely right about you're always a participant observer, aren't you?
Mm.
Just the nature of the leader being there changes the dynamic,
Mhm.
which can be which is a good thing if you get it right.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Mhm.
But it does mean that you need to give some thought to it. You've got to be deliberate about how you present. Otherwise, you change things in all kinds of ways that not only have you not planned to do, but you probably don't even realise you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that brings us back, doesn't it, again to something we said earlier, but being on automatic pilot as a leader is a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's you just before a fall comes in. Andy, you mentioned in your book that vulnerability is a separating factor. And I find that really interesting. And I was keen to read on that. One of the things you say is that vulnerability separates leaders from dictators. Um, I've probably known leaders in kind of both camps there, and some who kind of move between the two. But what do you really mean by that? That vulnerability separates leaders from dictators?
Uh, because I think when I wrote that, I was thinking that the aspect of vulnerability that means that you can that you're open to changing your mind,
Mm. Hmm.
and that you don't feel that because I suppose there are a couple of circumstances, aren't there? And I'm not sure which is worse, whether a leader who thinks they're right and doesn't care whether they are right or not, but because they're the leader, that means they are right.
Mm.
Or possibly worse, a leader who knows they're wrong, but because they're the leader, insists they're going to do it anyway, because as the leader, they can't say, oh, I don't think I was right.
Yes.
And both of those things are catastrophic.
I think, yes, yes. I think at one point in that chapter, you talk about weakness, and that's possibly describing weakness. It's kind of like I think you mentioned it's a kind of hard shell to,
Yeah,
what was it? I think was it to keep danger out or threat out or something?
yeah. So something like that. I'd kind of forgotten I wrote that, and when I went back and read it this week, I
Yeah.
was rather pleased with it. I thought that was quite a nice. That was quite a nice paragraph.
Isn't it always great when that happens? I used to do that all the time. You'd be writing policies or whatever, and you'd have to come to review them, years later, whatever, and you'd read something, you say, "Good God, who wrote that? That's bloody
Yeah,
good."
sounds
And you
clever.
flick to the end, you see it's me. Oh wow! Let's hope I can do as well this time. But yeah, yeah,
I think it's yeah. The thing about the shell is interesting. I think you have to be permeable, don't you? You have to be permeable to other people's ideas and opinions, and if you're not, then well, I think you're just on a road to nowhere. Surely
yeah,
it can't work out. And I've got a colleague who tells me from time to time that not everyone out there is like we are, and not everyone else thinks this way. Um, and I'm sure that's true.
yeah,
But I question what those people are doing at a time when even schools with really desirable, nice cheap housing and good road links or whatever are struggling to recruit. How can you afford to lead in such a tone deaf, tin-eared way? Because surely your staff will just leave and go somewhere else.
and that does happen a lot in certain areas and places. Yeah, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the leadership has a lot to do with that. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I was trying to remember, and maybe you will. There's a U2 song, and it talks about the animal. The harder the shell, the softer the. And I can't remember what it is, but obviously it's the inside. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I always think there's something of that that's very true about leadership. These tough, hard leaders that put on this front and this persona. And you do talk about persona of leadership. We do need a persona, but it has to be one that kind of fits. But I do think about the tough leaders are maybe some of the weakest in their own quiet, the least confident. It's maybe a better way of putting it.
yeah. I think that's probably true.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
I'd like to put that to some of them and see what they say. I doubt they'd agree,
exactly.
which is kind of the point, isn't it?
It's exactly the point. Yes.
Which is kind of
Yeah.
the point. The first headship role I went for, I didn't get my first headship interview.
Hmm.
And in the feedback, the guy said to me that we thought, clearly you will be you'll be a head teacher and you'll be a good head teacher, but what this school needs is a bit of steel. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
need your. And he wasn't at all rude, but I could tell what he meant was your slightly whiffy waffy person centered approach. What we need here is someone to take charge.
Mm-hmm.
So they appointed this guy to take charge, and he was only there about 9 months,
Yeah.
and then went.
And then he went. Yeah. Yeah.
Not
Yeah. Well,
great.
that does happen. Yeah, it does. Yeah. I always think, I suppose, schools are full of humans,
Yeah.
and they need to be led by a human. They can't be led by a machine or a dictator or something like that. And there's a great document. It's produced by is it the Department of Education or somebody in Scotland or whatever, and it talks about the principal has to be the best teacher. In fact, I think that's the title of it, maybe, or something. Yes, the principal has to be or should be the best teacher. But it does go on to talk a lot about, the human qualities that the principal should have and how those really are strengths. And of course, one of them is being vulnerable. It's possibly one of the best strengths they could have, just being human, really,
Mm.
and relating and being able to relate, not being in your ivory tower. Mhm.
Yeah,
Very
that's interesting.
interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah. Um, I was going to say there, yeah. Yeah. You talk a little bit about in that chapter, you have a nice metaphor. You say that vulnerability is a precious stone that needs to be set and supported by other qualities, and that includes competence. Now, you do mention a few other qualities, but competence definitely comes first. I think the others come in another
Mm.
sentence, even. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How vulnerability and competence need to go together?
Yeah, I can. So there was a particular gosh, what was it I was trying to launch and persuade people about? I can't even remember now what the initiative was, but I
Mm.
said to some, I kind of said to some people, a group of parents, part of the beauty about this is that we don't even know what it looks like. This is an exciting thing because we're committed to doing it and we know why we're doing it, but we're not really sure what the project is going to end up looking like at all. And so we're inviting you to join us on what's a really exciting project as we kind of take this step into the unknown together.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was a kind of a medium okay bit of rhetoric. And
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, someone said to me, "What those people have just heard is that you don't know what you're doing."
Yeah. Okay.
And
Right.
it made me think that they didn't know me well enough.
Mm-hmm.
So if they knew that we'd done things like that before together and it had been okay, then that would have
Yeah.
been different.
Yeah.
But actually, to stand in front of people who didn't know me and say, "I don't know what this looks like. Come on, let's do it anyway,"
Yeah.
just looked a bit reckless. So
Yeah.
if you haven't got that, if you haven't got a really solid base of competence, if people don't know that you're a safe pair of hands, then saying, "I don't really know what the answer is," just
Yeah.
makes you got someone who doesn't know what the answer is.
Mm. Okay. That's yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. You do talk about, you go on to say, demonstrate that you know what you're doing. I suppose that fits in, yeah. I got that piece of advice once.
Did
Um,
you?
I think it was around about, yeah, it wasn't worded very well to me. Well, let me rephrase that. It could have been worded very well to me, but how I interpreted it was really quite different. And um, I think for a long time, my sense of confidence came across as um, like know it all almost,
Mm.
and behind it, I didn't know too much at all, actually. It was maybe not arrogance, but it was kind of like, that kind of laissez faire swagger almost kind of thing. And that got me into a lot of trouble before I kind of rethought that advice. Demonstrate, that you are competent, you can achieve, you can do things. You don't do it wearing it on your sleeve. You do it in much more subtle kind of ways, and that certainly worked a lot better for me.
Yeah, for sure. Uh,
Yeah, it brings me
is
to
there?
another. Sorry,
Sorry,
go
go on.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, after you.
I was going to say it brings me to another important concept in that chapter, I think, and that is you talk about the need for people. I think I have it here. Yes, I do. People need to know who their leaders are. I've always believed that. It's a difficult thing, and to believe in them. So there's absolutely a need for a certain level of charisma and confidence when communicating with our communities within school and without. Thought that was a superb. You really captured that very well. Can you tell us a little bit about, people knowing who our leaders are?
Yeah, it's and that's I'm having to think a bit about that.
Hmm.
I have to think a bit about that, because that comes back to that kind of thing about authenticity, doesn't it? You can't tell people you're someone who you're not. So you have to be honest and truthful about that. But also, we've got to be realistic that the people we are at work are not the people we are at home. I had a real insight recently. I was reading an article about acting, and it said that in acting there's this concept of being happy and high status that gives you the confidence to behave in a certain way amongst strangers.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I think that's something that we do as school leaders. When I think about it, if I go to a party of my peers, there's no way I'm going to walk around introducing myself and shaking people by the hand and chit chatting and small talk. It's absolutely not me. But if I'm at a school awards evening, I will do all those things, and I don't think that's a contradiction. I think that's because in that situation, I am happy and I have high status, and therefore that emboldens me in a way to be a much more charismatic and extroverted person than I genuinely am in the rest of my life.
Yeah. That's like your professional persona.
Yeah, but it's still me.
Yes.
It's still me. It's not. I'm not having to kind of turn it on, or pretend to be someone I'm not. I guess it's just. I think I say somewhere else in the book that it's a bit like a graphic equalizer, and we can turn some frequencies up and other frequencies down, but at the end, the music's still the music, and that's a bit what we're like, isn't it? When we want people to get to know us, we choose the bits of ourselves that we share.
Yeah, that's very good. That's excellent. Yeah, yeah, a lot of thinking in that. Yeah, and yeah, so people need to know who their leaders are. Yeah, and then is that different from, because you talk a lot about this in the same chapter as well, the need to be aware of how we are perceived.
Yeah, because that's where that choosing which frequencies we turn up and which frequencies we turn down has to be done, with discretion, doesn't it? We have to think about, well, who's our audience? What do they want from me? What do they like to get from me? Am I somehow presenting something that I don't realise I'm presenting? Am I giving an impression I might not want to give? Have I accidentally just stood in front of a meeting and told them I don't know what I'm doing? How do I need to sort of just judge and adjust what I'm doing in order to be to be kind of the people that people want and need me to be?
How do we get that feedback, Andy? How do we know how we're being perceived?
Well, if you've got those good relationships, then I think you can ask people.
Yeah.
And I think people will tell you. Someone said to me once, so one of my favourite things in the whole school year, Paul, is presentation evening and doing the speeches for the two big cup winners, where you get a chance to spend 2 or 3 minutes just really extolling the virtues of one amazing student, and it's a lovely job to have. Lovely job to have. And one year, a colleague said to me, I love it when you do those things. I could listen to you all day, honestly. Speak like that, I'll follow you anywhere. But you never smile. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. I didn't realise. And I suppose I was kind of almost sermonising rather than celebrating. So, so since that day, I've made a conscious effort to smile when I'm doing those things. Which doesn't come naturally to me. I don't know why. I smile a lot at other times, but I just need to remember, I guess, that I can look a little bit stern without meaning to. And I'm really grateful for those bits of feedback, because they stick with you and they're helpful.
They're invaluable, aren't they? Because I do think one of the hardest things is to get the experience of how you're perceived. How do you come across? That's very difficult to kind of get on your own. I think you do need those other people to act like a mirror
Yeah.
and tell you things like, you know, Paul, you stood with your hands in your pockets there when you were talking to that group. That looked really bad. Or whatever it is, invaluable advice. Mhm.
Yeah, and it's a great dialogue, isn't it? If people feel comfortable giving you as the boss that kind of feedback,
Mm.
then that probably says you're in a pretty good place to be able to give them feedback as well.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a good culture to be in, isn't it?
yeah. It is definitely, yeah. And you do say, I'm just spotting it here, I wrote it down. Yeah, you do. Being the best version of you is tiring. And a separate quotation, have the confidence to be you. Um, but crucial, I think, for leadership. Andy, it's at this part in the show I usually ask guests if you had a magic wand and only one spell that you were able to cast, what spell would you cast to make the lot of teachers better?
Wow. And there's so much that needs doing. And I feel at the minute, we look at mental health services and we look at family support services and we look at help for those vulnerable children and families. And it feels like we're waiting for the cavalry and the cavalry isn't coming.
Mhm.
So there's a lot that we could do to change it. But I think the thing that would make the single biggest difference in my school would be if I could afford to give every single teacher a minimum of 20% non-contact time. If everyone had a day a week non-contact, the things we could do, it'd be fantastic. All I need is £500,000.
That's all.
That's all.
Let's hope it comes out of the ether somewhere. Yeah,
Bound to
yeah.
bound to
Uh,
happen.
yeah, yeah. That would be a luxury. That would be a luxury for
Oh, it'd be
teachers.
fantastic.
In
And
fact.
then when we say to people we want to do, we've got an open door policy, it really means something because people have got the time to go into each other's lessons and they've got the time to do instructional coaching. They've got time to do some research and some reading and some proper planning and preparation. I mean, whoever thought that it's a nonsense, the idea that you can plan for a fortnight's teaching in 5 hours.
Mm.
Goodness me.
Yeah,
Goodness me. It takes me an hour to plan a 10-minute assembly.
exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You mentioned one of my favorite things there, and I think it's when I really grew into being a proper kind of felt sense of a teacher, and that is when I moved to a school where team teaching was a thing.
Mm.
And, I taught some geography, taught some history, taught some English, and so on, side by side with experienced teachers. I'd never done that before. So we planned the lesson together, we co taught the lesson, we evaluated and planned again afterwards. I learned so much in those. And I think now, if I remember, they were 12-week rotations, so it wasn't for a full year. So for 12 weeks, I was with a geography teacher and so on. But really, really, really enhanced my understanding of teaching and my skills as a teacher. That would be brilliant.
It's really valuable, that stuff, isn't it? It's really valuable. And we've, as it feels that we've just been in such a prolonged period of undervaluing the profession that we've got loads of ideas about what to do, but we've got no time and no money to do any of them.
Yeah.
We could be so much better, couldn't we? We could be so much better.
And at a time, I think, when so many additional pressures are looming up, on the horizon and invading schools and teachers and principals and leaders and so on, just when we need more resources, more time, less of everything is there. Listen, Andy, it's been a fantastic show. I don't want to end it on a kind of a dull note.
No, that's not.
Regular listeners to the show know that it's my belief teaching is the greatest job in the world. I don't know a better job. I know better paid ones, but very few that challenge teaching for its satisfaction and what you can get out of it. Andy, it's been great. It's been great to spend time with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
And I hope to have you as a guest again in the future.
Oh, I'd love that. It's been great. Thanks ever so much for having me. Really, really enjoyed that.
Super duper. Andy, thank you and bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.